Welcome to Alaska Fisheries 101. We're happy to have you with us today. My name is Michelle Stratton. I serve as the Executive Director of the Alaska Marine Community Coalition. AMCC is a fisherman-founded organization working to advance sustainable fisheries, healthy marine ecosystems, and thriving communities across Alaska. This webinar is part of a broader effort to help policymakers, candidates, staff, and members of the public better understand why fisheries matter to Alaska, not just as an industry, but as a foundation for food security, local economies, culture, working waterfronts, and community identity. Fisheries policy can be technical, and it's easy for conversations to get narrowed down to acronyms, allocation fights, or single species management decisions. But at the center of all this are people: fishermen, crew, families, processors, subsistence users, coastal residents, and communities that depend on healthy fish populations and management decisions. Today's conversation is meant to provide a practical grounding in how Alaska fisheries work, why they matter, and what is at stake as our fisheries and fishing communities face major pressures, including consolidation, changing ocean conditions, aging infrastructure, barriers to entry, and outmigration of fishing access and economic benefits. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Maddie Lightsey, the president of Alaska Boats and Permits, who will moderate today's conversation. Maddie brings a thoughtful and community-centered perspective to this work, and we are grateful for her role today in helping create a clear, accessible discussion for everyone joining. Thank you, Maddie.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Before we kick things off, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Michelle and everyone at the Alaska Marine Community Coalition for putting this together and for everything that they do to support and strengthen Alaska's coastal communities. The vast majority of registrants for this webinar today are current legislators, political staffers, candidates running for office, and their teams. And I think that speaks volumes to the significance of fisheries, to Alaska's political landscape, to our identity as Alaskans, and to the forces shaping this year's election. So a huge thank you to Michelle and everyone at AMCC. To start, I'm going to have each of our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. Lauren, would you kick us off?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Howard. I'm joining you from Sitka, Alaska. I am the policy coordinator for the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and the Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust. I also sit on the advisory panel to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and I'm in my 5th year serving there. And I'm also an advisor to the Pacific State Marine Fisheries Commission. And on top of that, my husband and I have a fishing business. He's a longline troller. We operate an old wood fishing vessel and prosecute fisheries for salmon, black cod, and halibut in Southeast Alaska.
Thanks, Lauren. Cory.
Thanks, Maddie. And yeah, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cory Lescher, and I'm the science advisor and policy analyst for the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers. I'm located here in Anchorage, Alaska. A lot of background in fisheries, particularly in Alaska fisheries. Some of my science is also steered in the direction of research. I'm the chair of the North Pacific Research Board's advisory panel. I'm also a subsistence user and really proud to be part of Alaska Fisheries.
Thanks, Cory. Billy?
I'm Billy Hayden here in Homer, Alaska. I'm the president of the Homer Charter Association, the HCA. I operate a fleet of charter vessels here and also have a background in commercial fishing and managing canneries and tendering and all that kind of stuff too. So happy to be here and thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Billy. Julie?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Julie Kavanaugh. I was raised
Uh-oh, Julie. Can anyone else hear Julie?
Negative.
Negative. Julie, I'm going to pause and come back to you in a second. While we wait for some tech issues, one thing I'll point out is we had one more panelist that's going to do it today.
Oh, there I am. Sorry.
Julie, please start over.
Oh, yeah. I'll just say for the next 5 years, after I met my husband, I seined for salmon as a deckhand and skiff man and worked in the winters in a local flower shop where I received a master's manager florist certificate and became a full-time florist in 1990. I have managed the operations and books for our family fishing operation for the past 36 years, and 2 of our 4 children and a nephew are now invested in the business, which consists of 4 vessels, the Antares, the Sylvia Star, Insatiable, and Western Star. We have a healthy, successful business that is reliant on many things. Most important is access and conservation, which we think are the 2 vital components. And I believe that by engaging with the Alaska Board of Fish and the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, fishermen can influence and protect those fishery resources. Since 1995, I've regularly participated in fisheries management processes, and I currently serve on the Kodiak Advisory Committee as vice chair, the Fisheries Monitoring Advisory and Partial Coverage Fisheries Monitoring Advisory Committee since 2019, and I was on the North Pacific Fishery Management Advisory Panel from 2020. Excuse me, 2020 to 2024, and I served about, I don't know, like 5 years on the Kodiak Island Borough Assembly.
Thanks, Julie. We had one other gentleman who was going to join us today. Craig Chythluk was supposed to be here today, but he is just kicking off his season in Bristol Bay and unexpectedly had to launch his boat right now, which is apt. So he can't miss it today, and we will miss him and wish him the best. Okay, we have 3 themes of questions today and some time set aside for questions at the end. If anyone joining us today has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we will get to them after these 3 sections. Our first theme is why fisheries matter to Alaska. To start that, I want to ground us in the big picture. Fisheries are often discussed as an industry issue, but in Alaska, they're tied to much more than just fisheries and industry. They're connected to food, to jobs, to our culture, to our community well-being, and to the future of places across the state. They also shape whether coastal communities can hold on to access, identity, and opportunity over time. So I'd like to begin with why fisheries matter in the first place, and what is at stake if that connection weakens. Lauren, I'll start with you. What do fisheries make possible in Alaska communities, both economically and culturally?
A big question. Speaking from experience and what I've seen, just even living in Southeast Alaska, over the last just 10 years now, it's the backbone of our economy, especially here in Sitka. It's industry that keeps going no matter what happens. We saw that during COVID. No matter what, we kept fishing. A lot of other businesses got shut down, they got stopped, and we still kept working. So it's been that way for a long time. I mean, times immemorial before us, but into more modern times, it's just been what people can do in these rural, coastal, isolated communities that serves as an economic backbone to how our communities function.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Billy, what would you say that fisheries make possible in Alaska's communities, economically, culturally, however you'd like to chime in on that one?
Well, anybody that knows the fishermen knows that fishing is not just a job, it's a way of life, it's an identity, and it's deeply rooted here in Alaskan culture. Like fish is not just food for us, and it's not just how we make our living, it's just so much more than that. And here locally in Homer, proud to say that pretty much everybody that I employ is a Homer, or at least an Alaskan resident. These fisheries provide jobs so that people can afford to live here, and proud to say that I also my younger brother is a captain here, and my younger sister is also a captain, a great fisherman here as well. So tying into that, it's not just an identity, it's also a family culture. It's super important. It's really part of the root of coastal Alaskan communities. So it's very important to our state and to the people who live here.
Julie, what would you add to that?
Well, I just think that fish has always been Alaska. It's been an identity, like has been said. And even though we have relatively newer and what I call sexier resources sometimes, the marine resources in Alaska feed us and bind us and define us as Alaskans. And so I think it's really important to keep that are you listening? I think my internet's going in and out. I think the main purpose of this would be a threefold focus on preserving subsistence traditions, our cultural identity, and the community cohesion that we find when we live in coastal Alaska. I think that I guess I could go on, but I'll just let somebody else chime in.
Cory, do you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Maddie. I'll take a different approach to it. I really agree with everything that's been said. And something that maybe we overlook sometimes with fisheries that I see as really important or valuable is it's really a long-term monitoring program. Our harvesters, our fishermen, our communities, being out on the water and targeting the same species every season, every year. We really have an opportunity to monitor the health of the ecosystem or notice changes as they're happening slowly or as they're happening quite quickly. And that's something that I think we all account for, take into consideration, but sometimes it's not always the topic that everybody pays attention to. So I just wanted to bring that part up in this conversation as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point that does get lost sometimes. You're right. Billy, why are fisheries a policy issue for all of Alaska and not just fishermen?
I think we have to look at the food security issue. It's fantastic that we have all this food in our front yard, which is really, we're fortunate that way. And I think that fishermen are a lot of the backbone of the coastal communities, but even inland programs like sea shares and stuff are providing seafood and food relief for lower income folks, for food shelters, food banks. And so we really are providing for all of Alaska as fishermen, not just for ourselves and our direct communities. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, is even people inland and not coastal communities sometimes really rely on what we do as fishermen.
That's such a good reminder. Yeah. Lauren, why do you think fisheries are a policy issue for the entire state?
Playing on that a bit, I mean, there's so much interconnectedness in all of the policy. So like Cory was saying, the research level, having funding to have the research there to make sure we have our stock assessments, to make sure that we're allowed to go prosecute fisheries, whether that's subsistence fisheries, state fisheries, federal fisheries, they all rely on so many interconnected pieces in order for us to be able to prosecute fisheries. So sometimes it's, funding mechanisms or staffing issues or, other things that could get in the way of fisheries not being able to be prosecuted. And a lot of those can be affected by policy change or things that are happening on larger scale policy that sometimes had trickle down effects in fisheries that aren't thought of. We had an issue a couple years ago where it requires a federal rule to be posted for the sablefish fishery to open, but the government wasn't writing new rules. But this wasn't necessarily a new rule, but it was just part of how the policy went, where this rule had to be written in order for the fishery to open. So it took a lot of work for us to get our fishery open, which is just something you would think would happen every year. But that year it wasn't necessarily going to happen. So there's oftentimes effects in policy, in management, in regulation, unintended effects or consequences that can happen. So when we're thinking about policy and we're thinking about fisheries, it's really important when you get a really broad scale group together when you're thinking about these things, or you're consulting with the right people when you're making these types of larger scale changes or decisions, because of the unintended consequences that could happen if you don't realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, you're based out of Kodiak, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. It seems to me like in Kodiak and everywhere in Alaska, really, but every time I go to Kodiak, I'm reminded how connected everybody in Kodiak is to the fishing industry, even if they've never fished a day in their life. Can you speak to that at all and how fisheries kind of affect the entire community, even if someone's not a part of the industry?
Yeah, I think that maybe is based in just a vibrant waterfront, which leads to open businesses and the interaction that community members outside of the industry have with fishing. Fishing is kind of like a cultural identity, an economic identity that's a base layer to all the other really important activities going on in town. Fisheries that are vibrant are kind of like the glue that keeps our schools full and our stores busy. I know Safeway here is at times been one of the highest volume stores on the West Coast because boats come in and they supply up and provision up their vessels and stuff for seasons and stuff, and that's super important to this community. But one thing that is interesting to me is it's when you're talking to policymakers outside of coastal Alaska, I just think that it's good to remember that even though you might not be into fishing, into it, sport fishing or subsistence fishing, that most Alaskans like to access all of our natural resources, and fishing is one of the largest or primary reasons why we have access to those resources. I think that we're the predominant factor why there's harbors and why the structures and things are there for people to access going out in a small vessel or a small boat or a kayak or going out and just being in nature. So I think when you're talking from an interior legislator thinking about how that impacts their constituents would be super important. So I really do think it is for all of Alaskans to keep our fisheries healthy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Billy.
Yeah, and then piggybacking on what she just said there, for coastal communities, especially ones like Homer, access to waterways are important. Healthy fish populations are important, and the seasonality of where we live as well. The summer is like very fruitful. It's a beautiful place. We have so many fish coming in, so many people coming to visit the state too and spend their money here in the state, which really helps our economy. And so speaking to like socioeconomics of it, the fisheries are super important, especially in a town like Homer. We have tens of thousands of people that come here to go sport fishing. We have crew members that come in from all over the country to do our commercial fisheries as well. And it's a real interjection of money into our local economies here in the summertime. And so fisheries, it just cannot be understated how important healthy fisheries are to our coastal towns here.
Cory, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think again, really agree with everything else that's been said. Lauren mentioned this, interconnectedness. I think fisheries policy, is really important to all of Alaska because we are interconnected, and we see it on the forefront, particularly in our coastal communities and those fishing communities. But it's really a lot of the support businesses, the end users, consumers. To put it simply, we're all a really big family, and our harvesters and our fishing communities, are right there on the front lines. But to keep everything going, we're all interconnected and have stake in the game.
Absolutely. So given how interconnected we are, what is at risk if Alaskans lose access or participation and that fishing identity begins to erode? What do Alaskan communities lose when that happens? Julie, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, I'd love to, because I think that's important for people seeking office to really kind of understand in the context of why it's important. And I think that if we lose access to our fisheries and marine resources, we lose food security, we lose cultural and economic opportunity and community cohesion. The erosion of fishing in Alaska is the erosion of our identity and our community itself. So Fishing keeps our communities viable, and when access declines, our families move away, our school enrollment drops, our local taxes shrink, and our essential services like medical clinics, fuel, air service, shipping, all become more expensive and harder to sustain. And I really truly believe a coastal community without fishing is a coastal community that's at risk of disappearing. And we see that starting with the smaller villages or communities, and we're moving up now, seeing it in larger communities as well. And yeah, I'll try not to ramble.
No, we appreciate all of your thoughts. And if anyone else wants to jump in, great. Lauren, please.
No, I'll add to that. You know, ASFT, Alpha, and a lot of other organizations have done a lot of work in looking into kind of the loss of fisheries access and a lot of
I'm
our.
sorry, can you define those acronyms for people who might not be
Oh,
familiar?
I'm sorry. So the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, the Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust, who I work for, as well as many other, individual researchers and other organizations have done a lot of work on the loss of fisheries access in communities over time, and especially in rural native coastal communities. So when you have catch share programs such as IFQs or limited entry, you monetize a fishery or you limit the access, you're limiting, a person's ability to participate in fisheries, especially fisheries that once were just open access. So we have very few fisheries these days where you can just grab a boat, grab a reel, or grab something and go do a fishery. We have a couple that are a gear card that are about $75. So like lingcod, dinglebar, some jig fisheries. But other than that, you're talking like major infrastructure, major investment, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars just to go fishing. So we've seen this happen, and we've seen coastal communities really decline, struggle, people move away. And when it comes down to it, they don't want to. They don't want to move away. We want to live here. We want to live in these communities, especially for tribal members. They want to live in the village. They want to stay with their families. So we have to make sure that there's economic opportunity for people to do that. And fisheries is an amazing opportunity. There's not a single coastal community that doesn't have a fishery that has at one time, been a huge, viable, vibrant commercial fishery in their front yard. So we've done a lot of work on trying to kind of recreate access, bring back access, work with people on getting them back involved. And it's a lot of the work that, I personally have done over the last few years. And it's extremely important. And to see the reactions of people having the opportunity to go fishing again and just seeing the opportunity that they see in that in the future for them, for their kids to be able to stay in the community, it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'll just personally chime in and say that I've been able to witness a lot of what Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust has done and Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, and it's admirable for sure. Billy, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to what Lauren said there, we are seeing a trend. They called it in the past the grain of the fleet, where the price to entry on getting involved in fisheries was so high that young people could not get involved in it. And I really am a strong proponent of encouraging young people to join our fisheries. It's not just something that your dad did or your grandfather did. It's something you can do as well. And anything we can do to help kind of erode some of those barriers to entry would be really good, because if we want to keep on doing this in the future, we need young people involved. And something else I'd like to add too is for anybody that's listening, we really, as fishermen, rely on our scientific data and our surveys that Fish and Game does, the IPHC, and other organizations. We really want that data as fishermen, so that we can provide a good, sustainable harvest and continue to do this in the future. So our science is important. The data collection is super important to us fishermen, and it helps us make sure that we're maintaining good, viable stocks for the future, because we want our kids to be able to do this as well.
Absolutely. Cory, maybe you want to jump in a little bit on that because you saw firsthand what it means when we don't have good data.
Yeah, it's really tough to try to comprehend or to quantify the effects of losing access to to fisheries, in just to kind of, make it into a tangible example. In Julie's intro, she talked about how her and her husband and two of their sons and her nephew are invested, right now into multiple fisheries, 4 boats. And if just her family loses that access, the trickle effect is really quite substantial and large, and that's one family, and then you take away access, from a whole community, and it really starts to impact the rest of Alaska, like we were just talking about. It's all interconnected, and something that is often discussed in Alaska is, a diverse portfolio. Because that does happen sometimes. Fisheries are closed because we monitor stocks, and there are times, for example, the commercial crab sector lost access to Bristol Bay red king crab and snow crab, and that's directly impacts the fishermen that I work for and represent, and so when those fishermen are able to be diversified and fall back into other fisheries, that can help them kind of weather those storms. But if they don't have access to multiple fisheries, or if they're invested fully in one of those fisheries that goes away, it can have devastating impacts, and we've seen that with our fishermen, and there are many other examples across the state. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to make sure that we do our due diligence so that we don't lose that access to fishing.
Absolutely. For those who might not be aware, what does it mean to not have the data? Why would we not have the data? Where does that funding come from? Why did community, for instance, with the Bering Sea crabbers, why did they have to take a break for a minute from fishing? Why did they lose access and participation? What does that mean?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in and just back to the crab example. And there's a lot of different ways that this can really filter through. But for crab, we monitor, these stocks, and when I say we, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA, the federal government really oversees a lot of our federal fishing grounds, and we have long-term, 50 years of continuous monitoring, and so we base things off of these historical averages, and we set thresholds that have to be met. For example, um, female red king crab abundance has to be at a certain level, and commercially fishing for red king crab, it's a male only fishery, and there's a size limit, a minimum size. And so even though we're targeting males, we still want to make sure there's enough females in the system to produce enough offspring to support fisheries. And for 2 years in a row, that female threshold wasn't met, and that's something that our scientists set a long time ago and continuously monitor to make sure that threshold is, at the appropriate level. And then when our survey results come back, and for example, at the red king crab, we didn't meet that threshold, and so the commercial fishery was closed for 2 years, with the hopes that by closing it and the direct removal from fisheries would give an opportunity for those females to bounce back up. But there's also other management measures that can be in play. But that's why that data, that annual survey data, and other sources of scientific data are really important.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in on that before I take a question from the audience? Okay, our first audience question. Are there any issues that are universally important to fishermen of all gear groups that are within the purview of the Alaska legislature? Julie, do you want to start us off with that one?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think that all Alaska legislators and representatives should remember that fish are a public resource and that they're owned by all Alaskans. And so you need to legislate and manage with that in mind, that we all have, as Alaskans, a stake in fisheries and how they're managed. policy decisions need to have balance and control in them. And I would say that that means that commercial, sport, and subsistence needs all need to be intertwined and connected. So when you're forming fisheries policy, you also need to understand that it's a shared wealth with all of your constituents, but they differ in the dependence that they have. And so if you're balancing those differences, you need to know that you need to like really form them in a place-based manner, understanding that the resources are outside of certain communities' doorsteps, but that it's grounded, and that it's also grounded in the realities of each user group, right? Like, so subsistence, commercial, and sports users use fish differently, and therefore they need differently. Like, their needs are absolutely different. And I'll try to like figure out how to say that. So like a subsistence user, it is really their need is about food security and cultural continuity. Commercial fishers, they want economic stability. We want predictability. We want forecastable regulations. And sport users, I do sport fish occasionally, and maybe somebody else will correct me, but I just believe they need access and opportunity is kind of what they're looking for. And as a legislator or a policymaker, you just really need to understand that one single policy doesn't meet all of those needs, and that they aren't equally, like I guess the word is, like they don't meet everything equally. And a uniform rule ignores the unequal stakes that people have in fisheries management. So you have to be able to kind of conceptualize all of that, all of the needs from the different user groups, so that you form good policy. I think some groups can absorb a bad season and others cannot. Like, if you lose a subsistence season, that means hunger, right? And cultural loss. A commercial season, that can collapse a local economy. And a sports season can devastate tourist-dependent towns. And so you have to look at them differently when you're forming policy. Basically, policy drivers need to understand that there's different relationships with fish or resources.
Yeah, this is a really good leeway into our next theme. So I'm gonna dive.
Could I add to that just real quick? 'Cause I have one
Yeah,
specific thing. Okay, just to specifically that question, that there's two things that came to mind that were like specific on policy with the Alaska State Legislature, and one would be ADF&G funding, just making sure that our Alaska Department of Fish and Game is properly funded because of our dependence on them for all of our fisheries, state fisheries, to be prosecuted. And then the second is Board of Fish and having a good, diverse, proper group of appointees on the Board of Fish to make sure that you have good representation for all of our fisheries that are governed by the Board of Fish.
Yeah, Billy.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, right here I have the entire proposal book, 184 proposals that went before the Board of Fish for state fish stuff this year. And that shows you there are 184 proposals just for state fish. And that's how much people care and how important it is to our environment here. And some of these policies that are put statewide don't reflect what the certain bioregion needs. So the fishery in Kodiak is different than the fishery out west. It's different than the fishery in southeast. And so making policy that's maybe not broad statewide, but more bioregion based, and listening to the fishermen there can really help make good policy rather than just a blanket policy.
Yeah, that's a great point. For those who don't know, I'm going to just jump in really fast and mention that the Alaska Board of Fisheries is a group of 7 members that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, and they manage the regulations for all of the state fisheries, sport and commercial and subsistence. And again, appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, which is I'm saying that because the governor is so important to Alaska's fishery management dynamic. Okay, so thank you all of you for those answers. The next question, really, the next theme really ties into all of this in state policy and different user groups. So our next theme is how policy affects these different user groups: commercial, subsistence, sport, personal use, recreation, how policy affects them differently. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, and I want to dig in a little bit deeper. So one challenge when we have these policy conversations is that fisheries often can be treated as this single entity. And this last question from the audience was so great because they are clearly not a single entity. And as Julie pointed out, there is no one size fits all answer. Not only are there different users, but there are different communities, there are different ways of relating to fish, and not all of those values show up equally in policy discussions or in policy solutions. So let's unpack that a little bit. Lauren, going back to you, what do you think tends to get undervalued or missed in fisheries policy conversations in terms of the differences between user groups?
Generally, in policy conversations, I think community level impacts aren't talked about enough. And that's either federal and state. A lot of times we just talk about the fish, right? And then sometimes you talk about the numbers and the economics, and it's really easy to work in the quantitative side of things, to look at hard data on raw fish tax or income, number of crew, things like that. But it's really hard to look at the qualitative side of impacts. So I think like really considering some of the social science and the looks at the qualitative side and, quality of life in communities when you have fisheries issues. Specific to different user groups, I mean, there's a lot there. And I appreciate how Julie really kind of started to break that down a bit in speaking about the ways that people are affected differently. But overall, a lot of times these people are all coming from the same community. So you're seeing community level impacts that could be of a greater magnitude when you put that all together. So you're seeing, small businesses closing, loss of fisheries, raw fish tax to the community, loss of harbor income, less utility users, less groceries purchased. So ultimately, a lot of people can experience the same impacts, but it's going to be on a different magnitude.
Absolutely.
And it affects the community overall. So I think for me, I just keep coming back to that community level, impacts and loss, and closing and school closures and people leaving. I mean, we're seeing it in Sitka. We're seeing a lot of people leaving. It's not cheap to live here. So if you don't have some type of way to create a stable environment for yourself economically, it's really hard to stay.
Yeah, I'd jump in there if that's okay.
Please.
So what Lauren said is pretty important, and I think that as a leader and a policymaker, I'd like to see someone that has some bravery when facing fisheries issues. I think they're set aside sometimes because there's some conflict when we're talking about policy. And I feel like those conversations around policy are usually kind of flattened instead of actually addressed. So those different issues I talked about between subsistence, commercial, and sport fishers, recreational users are usually like glossed over, and there tends to be like some goal that we're trying to get at or somebody's trying to get out without having real conversations about what's going on. And so I just want to see some bravery amongst them, like address everybody instead of just one user group or whatever, and identify the concerns that everybody has, because we have a lot of user groups, a lot of residents that feel like they're not being listened to, and that causes anxiety. And we have a lot in common that we can build on. If we're just, I think we need to not just feel heard, but actually be heard. And I think that would make a huge difference.
Why do you think, or Julie or anyone else, why do you think that takes bravery? Why are we not seeing that, and why does that take bravery right now?
Say that again. I didn't hear you.
But you said that you'd like to see some bravery from our political leaders, and I agree. Why do you think that in today's political landscape that takes bravery to speak to all user groups? Why is that not happening?
So I remember quite a while ago, back when I was in my early 20s, I asked a legislator. I was working with some 4-H kids as a 4-H leader, some teen leaders, and um, I asked him, like, why aren't we talking about these fishery resources more? And he goes, they're not sexy enough. He goes, oil's sexy. Everybody benefits and understands a PFD, and so it's super sexy. Fisheries is messy. And I'll never forget that. It was a little bit longer statement than that. And so that's what I mean by bravery. It's a little bit messy, but you can have a clear statement and you can back it up, as long as you also recognize that there's some conflict, some differing of viewpoints. But if you are actually doing the right thing, your goal will have positive consequences for Alaskans.
Just to jump in, I was going to say the bravery is because they're contentious issues. Oftentimes we're talking about, allocation battles. It's me having to look at Billy and say, no, I need that king salmon more than you do, and what does that mean? And how do you quantify that from a apples to oranges perspective? Because our businesses aren't exactly the same, but they're all reliant on the same allocation, species, resources, data management schemes. So within communities, it's hard sometimes because, you'll be battling with your buddy because, you're a commercial fisherman and they're a charter fisherman, or they're a subsistence user and you're a recreational user, because the resource is so important to all of us. But it's hard to put that up like on the same scale across all platforms in terms of policy. So yeah, they're messy. It is messy. I'm in the middle of it all the time. In the federal side and the AP, and I'm not afraid to interject myself in places and ask hard questions and bring up difficult conversations, because we have to have them or else we're not going to get anywhere. So like I might not agree with the person next to me, but it doesn't mean we can't have a real conversation about it and really get real and talk about real community level, individual level, business level, vessel level impacts from the changes that are on the table. At the end of the day, I don't want to see any fisheries shut down. I want to see everyone have just as much of a chance as I do. And I think that's the ultimate goal. So as long as you have that as your goal, at the end of the day, you'll get somewhere.
I agree. Billy, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Lauren said it very well there. Like this panel we have here kind of reflects like the diversity of the fisheries we have. And at the end of the day, we're all fans of fishing and we want to be successful with whatever gear type we're using. And I really do feel in the last few years that Alaska has really rallied together, regardless of the fishery that you're in, to work together for good policy change. And I'm really encouraged by that. In fact, I think, Lauren, I think you and I were in Kodiak together for the MREP just 2 winters ago there. And it was really encouraging to have everybody in the room involved in different fisheries, but with one goal, and that was to learn more about policy, how it works, what we can do, and kind of like discussing with other people in the room. You like learn something new about their fishery. It gives you grace for people. Maybe clears up some of the misunderstandings or misinformation you might have about a fishery as well. And I think this panel just kind of reflects that we're, regardless of gear type, we're all fans of fishing and we all want to see good policy made based on good scientific data so that we can keep on doing the thing we enjoy.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to chime in on that before we move to the next one? Okay. Cory, what positive relationships or benefits exist between and amongst diverse user groups, or could exist, that you wish policymakers considered more?
Oh, that's a great question, Maddie. And it kind of brings me back to the last question you just asked and the discussion that we were just listening to. And Julie really pointed it out. It's easy for us to identify the differences between different user groups or fishing gear types. But we do have a lot in common. And a lot of times, on the higher level and, the offices and maybe even the policymakers and the legislature, that's where things can get really contentious. And when we're out on the water, we have a lot in common. And there's a sense of camaraderie between fishermen and groups. At the end of the day, we all look out for one another, and take care of each other on the water. Um, but really, I think something positive is when you get together and you have strength and opportunity, when you have trust and relationship between user groups, between gear types and different fisheries, and you can get a lot done, and building on those relationships, and that's something that I think is really important because there's a time and a place for policy and policymakers to to do the necessary things to manage fisheries, but working together and like I said, those relationships, you can really fast track a lot of change, and I firmly believe in that. But it takes trust, it takes those relationships, and but once you have that, we can identify a problem, work together, solve a problem. And again, we all want to be out on the water. We all want to bring, you know, economics back to our family, back to the state. And sometimes it takes working together, to make change the quickest.
Yeah. Uh, Speak, could you speak a little bit more to that trust word? I think it's understated sometimes. How do you think we could foster more trust between user groups, and then also between users and managers and policy makers? Because I think sometimes that trust is potentially one of the things that's lacking.
Yeah, and that comes from, a point that Lauren was talking about how, recently, fish politics have gotten really contentious, and it's messy. And when you filter through all of that and get to our fishermen, it starts with our fishermen and building those relationships and building trust, working together, and it takes time. It's something that I think that Alaska has really gone. The fisheries have gone up and down, and when when you start taking crab resource away from a crab fisherman or halibut resource away from, halibut fishermen, it can get really uncomfortable because, we depend on these resources, and other groups also depend on it, for various reasons. And so it's really important to identify, how we can work together, communicate, be transparent, and build that trust from the bottom up. And it takes time, and it takes patience and persistence. But I think that at the end of the day, the bottom line is just clear communication, and understanding that we all have a common goal, we all have a common need, and working together is sometimes the best solution.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead, Lauren.
yeah, real quick. I, I just want to plug for Cory. He's one of the best people I've watched in terms of building relationships and build trust in this process. He's really great at working across the lines and having real conversations, and I've learned a lot from him in that space. And I will say that a big place where you can work together and build trust is collaborative research, and we're seeing that a lot more these days. So we've lost a lot of funding opportunities, and federal funding for data collection and for research, and we're seeing more industry-led research, which makes sense. We're on the ocean day in, day out, year round. So what do you want to know? What can we do? What instrument can we drag around? What data points can we collect? How do we incorporate that, right? Or how do we make this gear work better? or how do we avoid this bycatch because we want to make sure that this person has better access. And so we're seeing a lot more efforts in collaborative research. And that oftentimes means, going across party lines, so to say, and working with other fisheries groups, whether it's through their organizations, whether it's contracting their vessels to do projects. So that's a place that we're seeing a lot of trust being built. And then also just opportunities to visit other communities, get on board a boat, see it in real time, whether it's at the dock or it's, going out fishing, but really actually kind of seeing how other fisheries work. So like Billy mentioned, we were at MREP, the Marine Resource Education Program, which is a week-long course, highly recommended to anyone interested in fisheries management, specifically federal, some state level as well. It's a free program, but it's a great place where, the gloves are off, everyone's there to learn, and you get to have these amazing one-on-one conversations with people that you wouldn't necessarily be in the room with, or with, high-level fishery managers or researchers or scientists that you might see passing in hallways at meetings, but you don't get to sit down and have a meal with. And I actually came up with a great collaborative research project at MREP that we're seeking funding for right now, just because I got to actually sit down and spend time with people that I don't usually get to spend time with. So it makes a big difference when you start learning more about the other fisheries or visiting the other communities and seeing the dependence. I loved going to Kodiak. It was incredible just to see the scale of vessels, just the number of processors, the dependence on fisheries in general there. Like you hear about it, you talk about it, but just to witness it and see it, step on board a trawl vessel, really see what that looks like. I mean, it makes a big difference.
I think I can try to speak to this a little differently from the trust aspect, because I definitely lacked trust and at a pretty high level, and still do a little bit after participating in both state and federal regulatory measures. And so what I've found that works best for me and for building my trust is transparency. So I think it's really important for policymakers to be as transparent as possible. Like, don't just quit communicating with users because you feel like you have a disagreement. Communicate your goals, what you think is where things are going if you can. And at least then your constituents and Alaska residents will view you as an honest and trustworthy speaker, right? Because I think the biggest missed opportunity is that we just have a deep common ground. I think both Billy and Cory have spoken to this. Like, you can look at it like stewardship. We all agree that we are stewards of our resources. We all are interested in our community's well-being, economic stability, cultural continuity. Those are all things that we all want and goals that we should have. So another thing that I think is important and that is missed a lot is that traditional knowledge and local knowledge is as important as scientific data, and they each offer something really unique. And then if I could underscore this next idea, listening is not integration. You can listen until everybody turns blue, but it's not integration. I believe it's pacification and condescension if you don't integrate it also. So your policy making is going to be the strongest it can be if you integrate all three of those things.
Excellent. Thank you all for those. I think transparency is such a huge thing. I think this transparent and stakeholder-driven process that we have in Alaska is what sets us apart from the rest of the world. We've got a couple audience questions in this theme. The first one is from a candidate running for representative in District 35. District 35 is located in the western portion of the Fairbanks North Star borough, covers the greater Fairbanks and College areas, including the communities of Esther and Chinapump and Rosie Creek and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, Geist, and the main campus of University of Alaska Fairbanks. So from this candidate, what are some laws or policies that need to be changed to make life better for your area as it pertains to fishing? What laws should be reduced or eliminated? And what do you want us in the interior to know? Which I think is an interesting question. I think fisheries, I think they're kind of unique as compared to other industries, especially in Alaska. If you look at mining or oil and gas, where fisheries we're here and we're saying, hi, please regulate us. And that's unique compared to some other industries. So um, let's see, Cory, I'll start with you. What do you think needs to be changed as far as laws or policies? What could be reduced or eliminated? And what do you want someone running for office in the interior to know?
Yeah, I'll touch on things that we mentioned throughout the discussion today. And again, that, all of Alaska is really dependent on healthy ocean conditions, healthy fisheries, not just our coastal communities, but all of Alaska is dependent on that. And again, something that was brought up that's really important is funding to do science and research. Our fishermen go to work every single day out on the water, and they have a very specific job, and we can help them by allowing ample research to continue monitoring and collecting information that helps inform management decisions. And so I think that from a high level, that's really important, and something that I think is tangible from folks helping, at a high level within the state of Alaska, is just to make sure that we have, the funding pipeline to reach out to those who are capable of carrying out the research, and also encouraging the collaborative research that Lauren was talking about. A lot of times we can use fishing vessels or fishermen as a platform. That local knowledge is really, really important, and sometimes a more affordable way to get things done when we can, have our fishermen collecting information for us. And so I would just start it there and just, emphasize the importance of funding for science and research.
I have a really messy one that we could all maybe agree or disagree on. Board of Fish and Board of Game conflict of interest. I think that legislators in Juneau could pick up that topic and address it, and it would benefit stakeholders across Alaska. I personally and individually believe that Board of Fish members should be able to participate, Board of Game members, which both should be able to participate in the discussion and discussion of items that they are potentially conflicted in, but shouldn't be able to actually vote. And I know that there's an opportunity for legislators to address that if they wanted to. It seems to me like on the surface, you might think that that looks messy, but I think that it would get to a couple of core problems across Alaska. One is candidates for those seats that are knowledgeable become difficult to find if they're conflicted out. So I know individuals that would like to serve at that capacity, but let's say me, if I was gonna put my name in for Board of Fish, I literally probably wouldn't be able to sit at the table for anything other than subsistence. And then because not even sport fish, because we are sometimes having allocative issues, maybe some Southeast issues I'd be able to sit at. But I think it would be valuable if as a member, I could be a part of the discussion, even if I had a conflict. And right now we can't do that. And a lot of people feel like they're more effective by not being on the Board of Fish, even if they would consider serving. So as statewide, I think that would be something that'd be very valuable.
Julie, you're absolutely right. I will point out that the conflict of interest, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I believe the conflict of interest bill finally passed. And so
it did. Oh
no. So, which is the point still stands. You're absolutely right. The point still stands is that so now folks can participate in these conversations if even if they are financially vested or they have family members that are vested in those fisheries. They can't vote, but they still can participate. But I think that your greater point still
Yeah.
stands. It's just
You
conflict
can
of
tell
interest.
that the spring is really, really busy for me and everybody else.
Oh, I
So
actually just had
I'm
to double
almost
check.
embarrassed that I missed that one.
No. I had to double check. I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure. But
It just
but
happened, I think, very
it
recently.
did just pass
So,
very
very
recently. Yep.
recently.
And
Yeah.
I think your point still stands that just conflict of interest in fisheries management is kind of a hot topic in general, and it's important to pay attention to.
Well, and just to piggyback on what she said too, just general, like the makeup and the appointments of Board of Fish. So like the Board of Fish does decisions on the entire state. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have people from that region that are there to be part of the conversation. So we've experienced it in Southeast where we're having a conversation about a troll fishery and we have a Board of Fish member that keeps calling it a trawl fishery. We're like, no, we're talking about trolling, which is very different than trawling. And so just having very good diverse makeup of the Board of Fish, potentially good regional representation, fisheries background or participation or interest representation, I think really makes a big difference in terms of your constituents feeling represented, there being a better general understanding of some of our fisheries as these discussions are occurring. And the Board of Fish is a bit Wild West to me because it happens so fast compared to the federal process. We'll talk about issues for 5 years, 6 years before we make a change, where Board of Fish, it can be relatively rapid within a year. So just understanding the power of that body and what the effects that it can have is important.
Another reminder that the governor appoints folks on the Board of Fish. Billy, please. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more to that, almost every other board of anything that deals with fisheries, IPHC, North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, you name it, are made up of fishermen. And so the Board of Fish, we really need expertise to be reflected in the Board of Fish. So we really want people that are involved in fisheries to be helping making those policy decisions there, rather than someone that does not understand the fishery and the needs of the fishery and the fishermen there. So I'm very happy that House bill passed, because that is something that fishermen have been asking for a long time. It's like, hey, we want guys on the Board of Fish that reflect what we see on the ground and what we see in our fisheries. So I'm very glad to see that pass.
I'll also just plug the expertise is so important for the actual board members, but it's also such a great reminder why we need folks to participate in those processes. We can't, it's a 7-member board. We can't possibly have 7 people who know everything that there is to know about every different fishery and every different user group in the state. And that's why it's so important to have stakeholders show up at these meetings and participate. So for anyone listening that is a stakeholder, please show up and participate. It's so important.
Yeah, guys, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
You're on the menu, exactly. I'm gonna move on to our next section here, our next theme, which is what gets overlooked in fisheries decision making. So for folks who work in policy, I think decisions can sometimes feel abstract or process heavy, but on the ground, those choices affect households and businesses, access and communities in very real ways. And as we just heard, sometimes it happens overnight, literally at the Board of Fish process. Sometimes it happens overnight. So I want to close out this webinar by talking about how policy shows up in real life and what decision makers should keep in mind when fisheries issues are before them. And Billy, I'll start with you here. What about your experience? You've got a broad, your experience is very broad. You touch on many different user groups. What about your experience as a harvester or a charter operator or a member of a fishing community? Do you wish that policymakers understood better or considered more?
I think a big part of it is realizing how important it is to us outside of just a job. It's a way of life and an identity. And I would encourage policymakers when they're making policy, or legislatures when there's bills in front of them, don't just talk to one fisherman. talk to as many fishermen as you can about it, because everybody has a different opinion, has a different experience on the water and the fishery. And so it's always important to collect opinions and data from many different fishermen, not just one type. Um, and if anybody that's running for any office would love to come down to Homer and hop on a drift net boat, a longliner, a seiner, a charter boat, you name it, a crabber, we can facilitate that. I can facilitate that. And you can get on the ground there and talk to the guys doing the job. And just encourage you to talk to more than one fisherman. All fishermen are quite opinionated, but it's important to get a broad spectrum of what's needed when we're making policy. So
That's an excellent point, and I think I'll plug everyone's groups here. You know, Lauren is a part of Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. Cory is with the Crabbers. Billy's with Homer Charter. So everyone has these groups that represent many fishermen and fishing businesses. I'm on the board of the North Pacific Fisheries Association, and I'll reiterate that if anyone running for office or that holds office or works with politicians is interested in a boots on deck point of view, please reach out to any of our groups. All of us would be really happy to facilitate something like that for you guys. Lauren, how about you? What do you wish that policymakers understood better or considered more?
I think the big thing is, like I said, trickle down effects. So community level impacts. It's a big one I keep going to because at the end of the day, it affects our children, affects our schools being open, affects our communities functioning from just raw fish tax revenue that comes to the dock. We've seen a few communities in the state really suffer, like King Cove, because the processor shut down, and that was the majority of the income that the community saw for their entire annual budget for operating. So there are certain policy decisions that could have really wide range of effects that are beyond the fishermen, right? That are into all of your entire constituent for entire community that could come directly from fisheries. So just really kind of considering on a broad scale, not just just some of the numbers like, oh, there's a few businesses that are going to be affected. It's like, okay, well, if those businesses shut down, who are those businesses doing business with? And how does that trickle down? So, and I will say I appreciate what you said, Maddie. Anyone wants to come to Sitka, we could show you a great time. We could show you a boat. We could get you on a boat. Love to take you around the docks and talk to a fisherman. And I think for me, working for this organization, the organizations I work for, serving on the boards and panels I serve on, it's easy to do because I'm also a fisherman. So a lot of times I'm there and I am representing an organization. I'm representing a lot of people, but I'm representing myself, my neighbors, my friends, my husband, my son, hopefully in the future. So I love having these conversations because like for me, they're very real. Like I'm living these decisions as they're being made. I'm experiencing these changes in real time. So I'm trying to be part of the conversation. Because just like Billy said, if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. So it's really important to be there. And it's hard to prioritize and make the time, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Cory, do you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question, and something that probably rings true for a lot of Alaskans. And I'm going to give an example. Maybe it's closer to the management level than the policy level, but I think they're definitely hand in hand. And our system is really built around and designed around qualitative science, and collecting hard data and putting data into models and trying to produce outcomes and manage fisheries based on qualitative science. And something that is maybe underappreciated or undervalued, and in my opinion, is local and traditional knowledge. I talked about that. We've been fishing, or Alaskans have been fishing for thousands of years, and really are the long-term monitors of the ecosystem. And so, building a pathway to accept or trust information from fishermen, their observations, and we're out there every year, every day, really paying attention to little things because that is what, makes a difference between a successful day on the water and an unsuccessful day on the water. And just a, quick example, in my own, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And in my time with the commercial crabbing industry, I've gone through the process to develop a survey that is a questionnaire that we give to our skippers at the end of every season. And it's very structured, and it's been vetted by scientists and, in an effort to really catalog information, local observations from our fishermen, and plug it directly into the management process. And so that's just an example of how we are currently doing that in our, small scale fisheries, but to be able to expand that and trust it, on the broader system to for managers and policymakers. I really emphasize the importance of our local and traditional knowledge in Alaska.
Great idea.
Yeah, and also I just really think that this question highlights whose perspectives need to be included, that we don't miss any of those perspectives. And a lot of people do feel underrepresented. I think you need to, as a representative for Alaskans, you need to realize that fishery policy impacts Alaska residents and those people in rural communities, indigenous communities, and maybe even the small boat fishermen feel like they have the least representation in formal decision making. And I also would suggest that when you think about especially traditional knowledge and local knowledge, to not a lesser degree, but it's easier maybe to access that. But traditional knowledge holders appreciate it when you do heavy-handed outreach, ask to come to their communities, ask to come to their forums. They have formal gatherings where their leadership get together and have decision making. And I think that that's important to do. Waiting for outreach from those sectors is a misstep.
Julie, that's a great thing to call out. Thank you. Lauren, what do you think decision makers sometimes underestimate or misunderstand about the role of fisheries decisions and policies on the lives of Alaskans?
I feel like a broken record, so I'll try and mix it up a little bit. But a lot of my participation in processes are more on a federal level, and we're always asked to look at it from the perspective of the net benefit to the nation. So you can really take that down to, like, when I think about state of Alaska and state politics and state managed fisheries, you could look at it the same way. I mean, the net benefit to Alaska as a whole, and how that affects Alaska as a whole, and what that means. So again, like, you can really take a very broad look, but then you have to, in order to get to what that means for Alaska, you have to look at kind of the smaller versions. Like, Alaska's large and expansive. So, Homer's a great example. You get a ton of people from Alaska like Alaskans who travel to Homer to fish, even outside of people, visitors from outside of the state, but they get a lot of people from Alaska also who come, and they fill their freezers from going fishing out of Homer because they're on the road system. So what happens when Homer loses access? I mean, it's affecting a lot of people from Alaska, especially people on the road system. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, not only just like the effects that Homer has as a community, but the effects that it has on the rest of Alaska that is seeking, either a subsistence opportunity or a sport fish opportunity, for filling their freezers. We've all seen the grocery prices lately. So, we could talk a lot too about the importance of, access to personal use and subsistence for our fisheries. So, yeah, I mean, it's important to look at it from effects on the nation, effects on Alaska, but you also have to go all the way down the line, down to the community level.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one? Anything that is underestimated or misunderstood? Yeah, Billy.
Yeah, like as an example of how important Alaskan fisheries are, especially halibut to the state and salmon as well. But for halibut at the IPHC this year, the actual president of the United
Like,
States sent.
I'm sorry, could you tell
Yep.
people what the IPHC is if they're not
Yep.
familiar?
So the International Pacific Halibut Commission is an organization that works on the treaty between the U.S. and Canada over halibut use and halibut take. I am usually a conference board member on there. But it's an organization that's been around for, I think there's 103 years now. Data collection showing the halibut fishery there. But if anyone doesn't think that it's important, I mean, the president sent Drew Lawler down there this year to the IPHC with a bunch of Alaskans and Canadians, of course, to help work on negotiating the treaty this year. So Alaskan fisheries are on a national stage. They're really important. They're important to Alaska, part of our identity. And that is even seen in Washington. We recently actually just had the president sign into law the RQE, which is the Recreational Quota Entity Program, which is a compensated reallocation of halibut resources from one sector to another. And that had to go all the way to the Oval Office and through Congress. So what we do here in Alaskan fisheries is definitely on the national level as well. And we need money for scientific data collection. Is really what us fishermen want. We really want to have that data. So please fund that stuff. It's just so important. We lost a rockfish survey funding that we were supposed to have this year. And so now a lot of the local fishermen are actually going to assist Fish and Game in doing that survey since they lost the funding for it. We really want that data. We want sustainability, and we want lawmakers and legislatures to talk to fishermen and find out what we need.
Cory, what is one question you think when lawmakers and managers are considering fisheries policy decisions? What is something that you think they should ask more often?
Yeah, great question. It's a tough one. I feel like we do a really good job of asking questions. And maybe I'll go in the deep end with this one. An important question that's a dangerous question to ask is, what if we get it wrong? And you know, like I said, we're using the best scientific data available to make our decisions, and it's often through a retrospective or a reactionary lens. And there's typically a specific goal or outcome that we're anticipating or looking for based off our understanding of science. And that's what if we got it right? And so it's dangerous, but what if our science gets it wrong? Or if Mother Nature throws a curveball at us and something that we're not expecting? And so I think normally I'd say that playing the what if game isn't very productive. But sometimes I think it's critical to consider when we're making, these critical decisions and explore, potential outcomes. And I don't want, us to get, down rabbit holes when we try playing the what if game. But if we're making really big decisions and we're anticipating specific outcomes based off of our understanding of that science, I think it's important to consider, what if we get it wrong? Or if we're making these decisions and we start seeing that maybe we are getting it wrong, how can we, reevaluate or monitor, and have checks and balances? And so that's maybe an interesting spin to your question to me, but just considering, different ramifications and who's impacted by those decisions.
It's not the
And
answer I was
good data
expecting.
helps us. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's a great answer. Philly, yeah, please.
Yeah, and having good data helps us reduce that uncertainty. In the fisheries when guys are making policy too. Good data, good outcomes. Typically, just piggybacking on what Cory said there. So it helps reduce the uncertainty when we are making decisions in the fishery.
Yeah. Julie or Lauren, do either one of you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I would love to. I think that lawmakers should ask themselves a couple of things. And the like when you're thinking on an action, it should be, what is the goal of your action and how does it play a role for Alaskans locally, regionally, and statewide, just kind of like Lauren was saying earlier. And also, does the regulation look balanced? If it looks balanced on paper, it actually can hit subsistence families and small boat commercial fishers and their rural communities far harder than other sectors. And so my question that I think that policymakers should ask themselves, are you feeding, growing, and sustaining Alaskans? And that's really the key for me is that should be the goal, and then ask yourself the questions to get there.
It's fantastic. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I appreciate what Julie said. I mean, no one wants to catch the last fish, right? Like we all want to have opportunity for our future generations. So having funding for data collection to make sure that we're getting it as right as we can, right, Cory? Because we don't always get it right. And we're in a place right now too with a lot of rapid change, a lot more uncertainty, recognizing sometimes our models are outdated, the inputs are wrong. So we're doing a lot of changes these days to the science as well, which is long overdue for some fisheries. Or we have kind of, I wouldn't say new emerging fisheries, but just shifts and changes in fisheries. We're just, we're in a time of rapid change, and that's fun, it's exciting, it's terrifying, but we have to be able to respond to it as well. So that's another thing. It's just like being able to respond to things as we're seeing them. And fishermen are resilient. They are hopeful. They're very willing to take risks, but they're also very willing to like step back and take cuts. Like they're willing to do that for conservation. Like I said, like we want to see policies that are going to create sustainable fisheries. We want to be able to know that the next generation is going to have a chance.
Actually, I'll put a plug in for the Board of Fish and Game process right here, because I think they're the counter to the long, never-ending process of the North Pacific Fishery Council meetings. Our processes are able to react to real-time situations in a way that affect Alaskans in a timely manner. I know that a couple of recent Board of Fisheries meetings, there were participants there from the federal side, and they were kind of amazed at how quickly the process went. But it's disheartening and expensive to be a part of the federal process when it takes 5 years. And so I would push back on anybody that said we should have a longer situation. I say that the Board of Fish and Game does use real science. They have great staff, and they respond to sectors and residents in a timely fashion.
I'd push back on 5 years. I don't know that I've ever seen the council push anything through in 5 years. That sounds really optimistic to me. Okay, before I close out, I'm gonna steal a quote. I was recently in Washington, D.C. working on federal policy, fisheries policy issues with Paul Doremus from Trident, and he said something that stuck with me. We were discussing the 50-year anniversary of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and he said that MSA has done its job, that it has done well by the fish, but it hasn't done as well by the fishermen. And I think keeping that in mind with policy decision making is so important. Given that, my last question for you guys is from the audience. What is the single most impactful action item that would benefit all user groups? And Lauren, I'll start with you.
I don't know if I'm supposed to do this from a federal fisheries perspective. Is that okay? Because it affects everything. But I think what you just said really struck a chord with me. Like Magnuson Stevens has done well by the fish, but not by the fishermen. And I couldn't agree more with that in a lot of ways when, you see the decline in our coastal communities, and a lot of it can be um, reduced back down to fisheries access in a lot of ways. So, for me, the big one is questioning optimum yield. Um, and so looking at the volume over value and how you balance that. So, Alaska has, I mean, the best seafood, hands down, the most seafood. I mean, the East Coast, they've got a couple, higher producing value fisheries, but not volume. There's something to be said about that. Like, we have a lot of opportunity to create more value out of our fisheries, but we're really based in this volume model. So when we're looking at everything from the perspective of optimum yield, which is OY, which MSA, everything is governed by OY, optimum yield, you have to start questioning like the large scale removal from volume and what that could look like if you were to shift it and tweak it and change it from a value perspective. So we have a lot of fisheries that, obviously fisheries have bycatch, and so you have necessary bycatch for fisheries. Every fishery has bycatch. I mean, bycatch is a necessary part of every fishery. But for some fisheries, like those bycatch species are extremely valuable to the directed fishery. So when you start looking at value and volume, or just in general, like in Southeast, we're constantly looking at full utilization of fish. How do we get more out of our products? So I just want to kind of leave that one as like a nice like ending comment of like really questioning, like pushing more volume coming out of the ocean versus looking at the value and creating more value in the species that we are able to harvest and what that means.
I'm so glad you said that. That quality over quantity seems to be a hot topic these days. Billy, what would you say the single most impactful action item would be that would benefit all user groups?
Well, I agree with Lauren wholeheartedly. Like value added to our product is what we want to see. If we could leave more fish in the water to harvest later, and bring the quality of our fish up. Alaskan salmon is like, it's such a wonderful fish. It's such a like delicious and iconic fish. And it doesn't look so good when we have it on the tender there. They're getting all smashed up. If we could add value to the product coming out of Alaska rather than quantity, I think that's probably what most fishermen would like to see. So I don't really have much to add other than that. I completely agree with Lauren.
Thanks, Billy. Julie, how about you?
Yeah, actually, Lauren addressed probably my biggest pet peeve with Magnus and Stephen Act is always trying to get to optimum yield. But I have another one of several, but my next favorite is addressing over capitalization by utilizing over consolidation. And what I've seen across Alaskan coastal communities is that impacts small boat fishermen and fleets way more than it does larger vessels to scale. So what I believe you have happening when you're trying to address overcapitalization is that it's the smaller boats in each sector that get dropped out, right? The people that have in that sector the best outfitted vessel are going to be able to weather that consolidation event, and then your fleet gets larger over time and you have less vessels in port. And even though maybe that situates them better financially in the long run, you have less vessels, and I truly believe that that efficiency leads to less activity in towns. So you really do need to think about what the goal is, and did you actually get it right when you were trying to address overcapitalization? And I think it's one of the things that have hindered coastal communities for the last 30 years, 25, 30 years.
I think you're absolutely right. Cory, do you want to close us out? Have anything to add to that one?
Agree with all of what's been said, and just real briefly would also add funding for science and research that benefits all of us.
Yep, I would second that. You guys, I'm going to pass this off to Michelle to close us out. Thank you all so much.
I just wanted to jump back on and say thank you to everyone who joined us today, and thank you to our speakers for sharing your time, knowledge, and perspective. It's just so helpful and useful in this conversation. Our hope is that this conversation helps ground fisheries policy in the people, communities, and ecosystems behind it. Healthy fisheries, accountable management, and strong fishing communities matter to all of Alaska. For more information, please visit AMCC's website at akmarine.org/fishfirst. We appreciate you all being here and being a part of this conversation, and we hope you'll continue to stay engaged. Thank you, everyone.